Hey there, I'm Hallie, live in Miami, and we are coming on the air on this day that is making history. Donald Trump pleading not guilty to more than 36 federal charges in the building just behind me here in downtown Miami. This is the first time we have ever seen this. You know that this is unprecedented, a former president facing federal charges. It is not the first time we have seen him indicted. We'll talk more about that, but here's what we saw in just the last couple of minutes here. His plane leaving Miami International Airport. He is now on his way back to New Jersey. Tonight, he plans to speak at his golf club there. We are going to bring you a special report on his remarks right here on this network on NBC News Now. We want to show you some of the scene here of what it was like literally feet from where we were as Donald Trump was leaving the courthouse, a quasi-campaign stop for the current Republican frontrunner for the 2024 nomination. He's meeting with the crowd at a popular Cuban restaurant. He was serenaded. People sang him happy birthday. It felt more like a victory lap than a post-arraignment stop.
What a great group of people.
And speaking just briefly, he gave his thoughts on the day's proceedings.
I think it's a rigged deal here. We have a rigged country. We have a country that's corrupt. We have a country that's got no borders. We have a country that's got nothing but problems. We're a nation in decline, and then they do this stuff.
These are the first court sketches of him inside that courtroom. No cameras in court, no video, no stills. So this is what we got, folks. You can see Donald Trump there. He's the one, obviously, in the red tie. He was flanked by his attorneys. And our team, who you'll hear from in just a moment, inside that room say he was stone-faced, crossing his arms, at some point looking visibly irritated at the proceedings. Then he walked out. And that's when things really got wild. Look at this. We don't see this. This is not normal. People rushing the motorcade, at least one person jumping in front of it, Secret Service agents having to sprint, essentially. Somebody ended up tackled. We understand, we assume that this person was arrested. And then there was this kind of like brawl that happened in front of the courthouse. Hundreds of demonstrators have been here on this sweltering hot Miami afternoon. You can see police officers telling people where to go. The security footprint here, part of the storyline that we're following. Here's what we're learning from our team, who watched the 47 minutes in person as it all happened inside that courtroom. The former president's attorney, Todd Blanche, is the one who spoke the words not guilty on the former president's behalf. We know the prosecutors are going to have to give a witness list, so the former president knows who he can and cannot speak to about the case. He is not supposed to speak to any witnesses about this. He also doesn't have any travel restrictions. He can keep his passport. Travel matters because, remember, he's a candidate running for office here. He's got campaign rallies all over the country. We understand that his alleged co-conspirator, Walt Nauta, who, by the way, was with him at that Cafe Versailles stop, he will be arraigned later on June 27th. Remember why he's here. These 37 federal charges laid out in the federal indictment. You can sum them up like this, right? Mr. Trump is accused of keeping classified documents he knew he was supposed to have given back, showing them to people who shouldn't have seen them in the first place, and then refusing to give those documents back when he was asked to. We're going to get to all of it, the legal, the security, the political, in our hour-long special coverage here. And I want to start with our senior legal correspondent, Laura Jarrett, our senior national correspondent, Gabe Gutierrez, who is here as well. We've got Guad Venegas, who saw all of it go down at Versailles in the last 30, 40 minutes or so. Our legal analyst, Danny Savalos, is in New York, along with Chuck Rosenberg in Los Angeles. We'll get to more on the politics front in just a minute. Gabe, I want to go to you because you were there. You were in the room. You sprinted like you were a high school track star to get back down here to tell us what it was like. Obviously, an incredible moment as you saw the former president on the other side of the room from the prosecutors who are charging him federally, including, by the way, Jack Smith, who was in the back.
Incredible to see Jack Smith there. And for the record, Hallie, I was actually in the media overflow room. That's how I was able to get out earlier to be able to sprint out and bring those early reports. My colleague Garrett Hake was in there, and he talked about how it felt to be inside that room just a few feet away from Jack Smith. According to Garrett, he says that he did not see the former president turn around and look at Jack Smith at all. But I was watching through a monitor as well in that media overflow room, and we were all struck to see Jack Smith there just because of the magnitude of this moment, Hallie. Think about it. The former president of the United States facing federal charges, as you said, for the first time. And Walt Nauta, just several feet from him as well. Yeah. You saw in those courtroom sketches sitting two
personal
people.
Aid,
exactly. And to see him there as well. And the question heading into this hearing was the former president going to be able to get counsel here in South Florida to let this arraignment play out? And I know we'll get to that with Laura probably, but now we're also hearing that Walt Nauta did not enter a plea in this particular arraignment. He was not arraigned. He'll be arraigned later this month, as you said. Somebody something else that stuck out to me. We were waiting to see whether former President Trump would actually say not guilty on his behalf like he did in the arraignment several months ago in the hush money case. His attorney said it on his behalf this time. And again, this hearing lasting 47 minutes as we're now looking at that video of the former president leaving Miami. But just a surreal scene here playing out, Hallie. I was in New York several months ago. This one had a very different feel, but we were in there for several hours, about 5 hours or so, waiting for this hearing to play out. And all the security preparations beforehand. Largely, though, as you said, not a huge security breach here at the courthouse, just minimal protests. Local authorities were preparing for potentially thousands of people here. We saw perhaps several hundred throughout the day. Thankfully, no major security scares
So,
here.
Laura, I want to get to you on what we saw, takeaways, and I want to look ahead, too, right? Because I don't think, and just so people know, we've been sitting together for the course of about 5 hours here talking. So I happen to know.
Felt like much shorter time.
Exactly. I happen to know that you saw this, largely fairly pro forma, nothing super shocking happening here, except perhaps this long interlude where the judge was talking about who can Donald Trump talk with here. Give me, let's say, your top 2-3 biggest takeaways and what we should be looking for as far as timeline moving forward.
It's one of the things that struck me the most about today is how much of this is the normal criminal justice process for any criminal defendant and how much of this is the process that the former president of the United States gets. Obviously, most criminal defendants don't get to come in through an underground tunnel and sort of go through this process seamlessly and then go ahead on a private plane and chopper coverage. On the other hand, he has to sit there and hear these charges against him. He has to enter a plea just like everybody else. Yes, he didn't have a mugshot, but he was processed in the federal booking system. Let's stop for a minute. He was the president, and he's now been booked for having retained classified documents. That's extraordinary. We're numb to it, I think, a little bit because we've all been in the mix of it and we're covering it, and this is not the second time. That should be a remarkable moment for any variety of situations. What strikes me, the judge warning both Mr. Trump and Mr. Nauta, despite the fact that they still work together, despite the fact that they traveled on that plane to Miami together, they are being told not to discuss this case. Why? Because there's worry that they could try to do a little bit of colluding when it comes to their testimony. Obviously, it's going to be very critical for prosecutors to secure that ahead of trial. And the judge, it sounds like, according to our reporting, not because the prosecutors raised it, but the judge said, I do not want you two talking about this case. Obviously, he recognizes it's an odd situation. Mr. Nauta still works for him. They can still talk, but they're not supposed to talk about this case.
Talk me through the timeline here, because, Gabe, and you'll jump in on the politics of this, too. It is likely that the former president's legal team, once they get assembled, will try to, in some ways, slow roll this thing, right? I mean, slow the timeline down.
Yes, that was the other point I was going to make about the extraordinary nature. He's facing 37 felony counts under the Espionage Act, and he doesn't have a full legal team. Full stop. That does not happen. You never have a case. I can't think of any case like this where someone has faced such extraordinary circumstances, especially someone who held the highest office in the land. And yet, even hours before this arraignment, we didn't quite know who was on his legal team. That's incredible. Of course, he has a former federal prosecutor. He has formidable legal representation. But still, he needs a team to represent him. And all we know about is these two attorneys at this moment.
And oh, by the way, he's also facing this 34 other counts in New York. And talking about that timeline, Hallie, while we don't know the timeline for this case, but that case in New York could potentially run up to these the primaries early next year. There's signs that that case could be heading to trial as early as next March. What happens with this case? And by the way, the other investigation in Georgia, this is all colliding with the U.S. presidential race. And as this GOP primary ramps up, of course, Hallie, as you know, I've been on the campaign trail these last few weeks with Governor Ron DeSantis and others. And now the GOP primary field is really having a reckoning. Some deciding how they're gonna play this. Now, Chris Christie and, of course, Nikki Haley coming out strongly against the former president. But so many others now are sticking by him. And where does this go from here?
That's right.
As Laura was alluding to, legally, this is so unprecedented because he doesn't have his legal team set up facing all these federal felony counts. politically what happens here. And just this afternoon, we saw that he is not taking his mind off of politics, heading to Cafe Versailles right after he left his court.
Capable co-anchor Gabe Gutierrez teeing us up for our next correspondent. Gabe, Laura, thank you. We'll see you later on this hour. I know. I appreciate your reporting. The aforementioned Guad Venegas is, in fact, at Cafe Versailles. Guad, a place that I think all of us here know well because it is such a typical kind of campaign stop here. And boy, that is exactly what we saw from Donald Trump. A campaign stop, not 12 minutes after he departed the courthouse where he'd been arraigned on federal charges. We're saying the word unprecedented quite a bit today in our coverage because factually it is. This is part and parcel for that. You were there. Give us a sense of what it was like in the room. We know that the former president continued to convey his belief that this is rigged. There is a corrupt system that is working against him, he thinks.
Hallie, I would also say another word that has been thrown around today, surreal. Seeing Donald Trump stop by today in what looked like a party with Donald Trump supporters. Now, Café Versailles is an iconic stop for many tourists in Miami, but also for locals, especially the Cuban-American community here. We're just down the street from Little Havana, very close by also to downtown where Donald Trump went to court. So we had dozens of people here early today, many of which did not know Donald Trump would be stopping by. This is a place where Trump supporters come protest normally. So they came out here with their flags. Cars were driving by all day, honking in support of those protesters. You can imagine what the reaction was like when they found out Donald Trump was stopping by the bakery. So we saw heavy police presence. The Secret Service arrived. They scanned people. They swept the area. It was really interesting, Hallie, to see the large group of supporters move into that area. They were swept, and they were allowed to get right up to the door where Donald Trump entered that bakery. In fact, on his way out, he turned around and shook some of their hands. So many of them got to shake hands with Donald Trump as they were playing salsa music on speakers right behind our camera. So that was the scene here, people cheering, playing salsa music, singing happy birthday for Donald Trump as well, of course, supporting him right after he spoke to a lot of supporters inside of that bakery. And Hallie, this is, of course, a strategic stop. Miami is very important for Donald Trump, the Cuban-American community. You know, there was a study done by Florida International University, a poll that is, and that poll asked Cuban-American Republicans who they preferred as a candidate for the Republican Party. 37% still preferred Donald Trump versus 21% preferring Ron DeSantis. So Donald Trump still has strong support. You can hear a megaphone behind me that says Trump 2024, and of course the flags. And Hallie, the cars honking in support have not stopped all day. So we've seen a lot of support, not just the people that arrived, but those that are driving up and down 8th Street, which is the famous Calle Ocho here in Miami. So very important for him to come speak to these supporters that have stood behind Donald Trump time and again. The Hispanic community in Miami, predominantly that Cuban-American community. And I would say the other place where he has a lot of support is Doral, Florida, where his golf resort is and where he stayed. A lot of Venezuelan Americans also in that community. So Donald Trump came to court, Hallie, but he also visited two of the communities where he has the strongest political support here in Florida, which we know is very important moving forward as he plans to still run for president, Hallie.
It's a great point, Guad Venegas. Thank you. And as for that run for president, we are going to hear from Donald Trump in a more formal setting later on tonight at his Bedminster home. Things are set up. The chairs are in place. It is going to be the first time that the American public is set to hear from a former president and a leading contender now for the nomination after being brought up on federal charges, after being arraigned for federal charges. The question, of course, what do voters think in both the primary and perhaps the general election? We may not have all the answers yet, but I want to bring in Dasha Burns, who is at Mr. Trump's property here in Florida, Doral, as well as our political director, Chuck Todd, of course, of Meet the Press. Dasha, let me start with you on the ground. Do we have any sense yet of what we're going to hear from the former president? If I had to guess, I would imagine it is that same defiance and sense of grievance that we have seen from him already as he's held events in the days since this indictment dropped last week.
Look, Hallie, we have seen this time and time again. And while if you talk to legal experts, any lawyer will tell you that this indictment is more serious than any other legal problem that the former president has had. In terms of the politics of this, Team Trump is playing this in the same way that they have played every other lawsuit, every other legal issue. The last indictment in New York with Alvin Bragg, he's going after the prosecutor. He's going after the Department of Justice. And most importantly, he is talking directly to the American people. And he has become so good at this messaging, Hallie. And this is what makes it so difficult for his opponents. He is saying, look, this is a system that's not just coming after me. It is coming after you, the American people. It is coming after the America First movement and the Republican Party. And anyone that tells you otherwise isn't with us, right? And that's what makes his opponents in this primary have to walk this very fine line. And you've seen this really fascinating spectrum of where you have, you know, a Chris Christie on the one end and a Vivek Ramaswamy on the other end, perhaps his most supportive rival, and then others in the middle trying to thread this very, very difficult needle. But yeah, I expect that tonight we will hear him leaning into this as we've heard him do so before. He is using this moment that for us today, as all cameras were pointed on him all day, we reported on as this historic moment, an unprecedented moment where a former president, former leader of the free world is getting federally indicted. But those very same images, Hallie, I would not be surprised if they ended up in a Trump team fundraising email, because they are using this day and these very same images to rally support, to gain momentum here, and to really push him forward in this primary.
And there are many optics. Even though there were no cameras in the courtroom, there were plenty of visuals outside court, some that Donald Trump created himself, some that his supporters created, that I imagine we will see again. Chuck, bringing me to you here, which is where people are on this. Our first snapshot since the indictment dropped suggested that roughly half of Republican voters hadn't had their views changed by the details of this indictment, the national security violations that the Department of Justice alleges here. 14% roughly of those Republican voters actually had their minds changed for the better about Donald Trump because of this. It may be a different story in a general election, though. Help us understand it.
Look, it absolutely, we've seen this before. Donald Trump might have deep and loyal support among the, I guess, call it the MAGA base, if you will, of the Republican Party, but he continues to alienate those swing voters. But let me tell you something, Hallie. You know, Donald Trump, he knows how to fill a vacuum that's created. You know, Jack Smith didn't have a media avail today. There wasn't a spokesperson for the Justice Department reiterating the indictment today, but there was a spokesperson for Donald Trump feeding the cameras. Jack Smith didn't go to, say, you know, Freedom Plaza to talk about the importance of the rule of law today. Donald Trump went to Cafe Versailles, a symbol for many political folks on the right in South Florida. So this is where it's asymmetric political warfare. Donald Trump has a pathetic legal defense, but he has a robust political strategy. And that political strategy, in some ways, has overtaken his legal problems in that he's got massive legal problems. He can't find lawyers. He's going to figure out how to juggle discovery in multiple cases. Paying for this is going to be something that, obviously, he's got other people's money to do that. That's part of the legal defense fund he does. He never pays for this stuff himself. But what is legal chaos is successful political strategy here. And I think that this is what makes, I think, whenever the legal world tries to hold Donald Trump accountable, you know, he uses the norms that we all abide by to his advantage, right? He doesn't abide by them, but he knows his political opponents will, or he knows the folks on the other side of the legal community will. And he took advantage of that today, big time.
We have seen already some of these campaign emails, some of these fundraising emails from the former president. Started pretty much, frankly, Chuck, the moment I woke up, probably the moment most of us woke up, and has gone throughout the course of the day. We have also seen a few, and I want to be clear here, a few voices in the Republican Party, notably Chris Christie, go after Donald Trump. As this arraignment coverage was happening, Christie tweeting loser, loser, loser about the former president. It is my sense, Chuck, from talking with Republicans close to other campaigns in the party writ large, that Chris Christie is in some ways an outlier, at least in saying publicly some of this.
Yeah, look, he is. There's three categories, right, of Republican responses to this. Category one is the defiance, rally around him. You know, Kevin McCarthy, oh yeah, well, at least bathrooms lock, garages don't, whatever he meant by that, trying to refer to where they found classified documents with Joe Biden. Then you have Chris Christie. This is very serious. He's, you know, how many more times you go down that road? Obviously, there aren't many Republicans who agree with him. And then there's the, what we saw with Tim Scott and Nikki Haley, John Thune, right, where you hear simultaneously an argument that says, well, there's a two-tiered system, but oh, by the way, this isn't good for electability. This isn't good for the general election. And I don't know if that argument works any better than Chris Christie's argument. Chris Christie's argument almost turns Republicans away and turns them off. But I don't know if the argument that says, hey, look, we know we don't trust them either, but hey, this is going to be a problem, and don't you want to win elections? I don't think that strategy is going to work either, Hallie. I haven't seen much evidence of it. Maybe you have.
Chuck Todd, Dasha Burns, thank you both very much. We've talked about now the political, right? We've talked about the legal. Part of the storyline here, not a big part, but at least part of it has been the security footprint. With, as I look around here near our setup just outside the courthouse, most of the demonstrators, most of the protesters who were here gone. It looked very different just not even a couple of hours ago. Dozens and dozens of them, right? In the hundreds, perhaps not the thousands, although that's still a question mark, showing up. And in this moment, you watched it live right here on this network. People running alongside the motorcade, one person seeming to run in front of it. It appeared that person was tackled or at least confronted by officers. And then this moment here with the cars in the motorcade, a small motorcade, carrying the former president, trying to make their way through. It is people from apparently all across the state, some from out of state, coming out to make their voices heard, to make their positions known. And listen, that is what we saw for most of the day. Sam Brock is joining us now with more on this. And Sam, you have some reporting here on what I think is going to be an important next part of the story, at least as it relates to a trial that may happen here in downtown Miami, the next steps in the process that may happen, and the perhaps disconnect between Miami police and the apparatus involved and the Secret Service. Talk us through.
Can you imagine, Hallie, if this is what the security footprint looks like for a trial, right? We got a test of that today, and it was pretty nuts. Now, on one hand, no one got injured, and there were, as you can attest to yourself, hundreds of people in the space where I'm standing right now, reporters, demonstrators, neighbors, all compressed right here. But the bigger issue today, as the day unfolded, actually ended up being one particular protester who, on the other side of this building, where the street is cordoned off, somehow managed to get himself in front of the motorcade and had to be tackled by security. And as you mentioned earlier, also prior to that, we're not sure if it's the same person or someone dressed similarly, was also confronted as the motorcade was making its way into the building. This is all problematic. The U.S. Secret Service says they have a good relationship with Miami, but they just want the public to know that what you saw here today, this particular template, is not from the U.S. Secret Service. This is Miami police deciding to allow a freedom of speech, if you will, folks to be able to get really close access to what's going on. I mean close, to the point where cars on Miami Avenue, which borders this building on one side, were honking and cheering on the crowd as the arraignment was going on. Now, I did speak with Francis Suarez, who is the mayor of Miami, and asked him, what's going on here, and should we feel comfortable? Here's what he said. Do you have any idea why it looks like everyone is sort of compressed in the same area? Protesters, media, everyone is right here. Is that part of the free speech process?
I think we are managing the situation very well right now. There haven't been any incidents, and we obviously have a very large force, and we have contingency plans to grow if there's any issues.
Hallie, what is also interesting about this is then a statement from the U.S. Secret Service prior to all of this happening. They said they were not necessarily concerned about the former president. They were concerned about the safety of the people here, and specifically being in a state like Florida, where gun laws are so lax, where the governor, Ron DeSantis, and the legislature just rolled back what you would need even a permit to conceal carry here, that all you would need is one little moment, one escalation, and you could have combustion. Thankfully, that did not happen.
Because, Sam, it is important to underscore here, things were mostly peaceful, almost entirely peaceful, other than that confrontation you saw between police and a protester.
Without a doubt. There were a few conflagrations, if you will, a little flare-up here and there, largely between MAGA protesters and what we think is the guy who ended up throwing himself in front of the motorcade. But that was largely sort of the crescendo of action was between those two groups. What was also interesting, though, is just talking to the folks who came out here and discussing the details of the indictment and saying, well, look, I understand some of the conservative narrative or talking points about the fact this seems to be a two-tier justice system, but look at what's actually in the indictment. Are you still saying the same thing? Here's a snippet of my conversation with one woman, Betty. But he had nuclear secrets, weapons capabilities for the United States, for other countries that he was showing other people. That, in your mind, is that an example of patriotism?
You know what? There's a bunch of lies.
So you think the indictment is lies?
Yeah, there's a lot of lies going on. I have been educating myself. I'm not stupid.
So you're open to the fact that elements of the indictment might be true?
Or might be false, all of it.
Okay, but what's your position today is that you
I support Trump, 100%.
Hallie, there you go. It's sort of this blind support for the former president, irrespective of the facts of the indictment or even as the trial plays out, which we think it will in the coming weeks and months. And it'll be interesting to see how this all works out. Hallie.
Sam Brock live for us not too far from where we are in downtown Miami. Sam, thank you. That brings us to former Miami official George Kalina. Chief Kalina, thank you so much for being here. I want to give you an opportunity to talk about what you saw today based on the coverage. Would you have done anything different had you been in charge?
I might have had more uniform officers that were visible within the crowd. But for the most part, it's typically the way that we would handle something like this. I know for the outsider who isn't used to seeing this many people walking around, they're used to more physical barriers. It may seem odd, but it's been our experience in South Florida that when you set up a skirmish line of officers in riot gear, for example, it just seems like more people come, there are flashpoints, it kind of puts the message out that something's about to happen now. And so they try to avoid that. Now, what they do have is a lot of officers standing by. They have a very professional bicycle response team that's capable of handling anything that can quickly become between people to separate folks. I think what they were probably monitoring, Hallie, is how many counter-protesters exist. Because that was always the question. I'm sure they knew that a lot of people were going to come out in support of Trump. This is Florida. He won the state of Florida. He won Miami-Dade County. The real question was going to be how many counter, and it was going to be necessary to have, what they call First Amendment zones for each group. And I think as that it evolved and it was fluid and they saw that there's really only a handful, I think maybe that's why they maintained that posture. Now, in terms of the Secret Service, they were embedded in a command center with the City of Miami Police Department, with the Miami-Dade Police Department, the marshals, the FBI. Certainly, I'm sure there was a lot of communication going on among all of them. I'm also sure they weren't pleased with that one protester that ran out front. And they probably weren't pleased with the stop at Versailles either, which, by the way, looked completely staged. That was not like an impromptu, Ron DeSantis visited Cafe Versailles. I wonder if there wasn't a little messaging there, that he owns it, because it was very popular for him as well.
We talked a little bit with Sam Brock about the potential for what it could look like during a trial here in Miami. What would you recommend doing differently? I hear you that and we've heard this, that the Miami Police Department was looking at their community and what typically happens. And, I've covered, as you know, Donald Trump for a long time. I do typically see bike rack, right? Hardened barricades, et cetera. Would you recommend doing anything differently for a trial, let's say? Or do you think that the presence here is appropriate and as you say, fit with what police in this area have seen in the past?
I'm guessing that they had a lot of officers standing by. In fact, I know they have because I communicated with the director of the county and with the police chief himself. So I know they had a lot of people standing by. For a trial, especially depending on what's allowed, what's introduced, who are witnesses, et cetera, I think that could be significantly more serious. This today was going to be procedural. Everyone knew what it was going to be. Everyone knew they weren't going to see the president, right? He was going to go underneath that garage. They really weren't going to get a chance to see him walk, like a perp walk type of thing, which could be inflammatory. And so I think that we're comfortable with today if there is a trial here, and I don't know that it's certain that it would be held here in Miami, but if it was, I suspect you would have areas where people would be allowed to come out just because there's a greater chance of a lone actor, somebody who's listening to a lot of this jargon on the chats that can become radicalized, for lack of a better term, and take a chance.
George Kalina, former Miami Police Chief. Chief Kalina, thank you so much for being with us here on NBC News Now. It's good to talk with you. Thanks. I want to bring in now our legal analyst, Chuck Rosenberg, as well as Danny Savalos, another one of our legal analysts. It's good to have both of you here. Let's take a beat here, because we have laid out the key points, the key highlights of what has happened here in the building behind me over the course of the last 3-4 hours or so. Chuck, I'll start with you. Most important takeaway that people should know, and what should we be looking for?
There's a long road ahead, Hallie. Every sort of occasion seems momentous in and of itself, but really, this is not the top of the first inning. It's the first pitch in the top of the first inning. And there will be procedural motions. There will be dispositive motions. There'll be arguments in the federal district court. There'll be discovery. There's a whole bunch of things that have to happen before we get to a trial. And a trial could be months, if not years away, depending on how some of those motions play out. So I would suggest that people do a couple of things, and I suggest this humbly. Read the indictment and take a breath. There's a lot of innings left to play.
Chuck, you do that as you do most things, which is humbly. I appreciate that. Stand by for 1 second, because Danny, let me ask you this. We saw Alina Habba, one of the former president's attorneys, come out and speak publicly to the, frankly, media who was here, also to the demonstrators who were in front of and behind her there. Felt more like a political defense than a legal defense. In the court of public opinion, that's one thing. In the actual courtroom, it's another. What do you expect, based on what we've heard publicly from those around Donald Trump, his team's legal defense strategy to be? One that would hold up, perhaps, in front of a judge?
Yeah, it's interesting, this whole theory of a two-tiered justice system. Whataboutism? Why not prosecute Joe Biden or other people? Why pick on Trump? There is actually a legal analog for this, and it's called selective prosecution. It's a motion that I do expect the defense will make, and they have to prove essentially that there are other similarly situated people, and the government, the prosecution, discriminated against Trump when it should have prosecuted these other people. Here's the bottom line. I've never seen or even heard of these motions succeeding. They're made, but that doesn't mean they have any real probability of succeeding. That doesn't mean the defense won't make the motion. They may argue that this is the rare case where we do have evidence of people that the prosecutors chose not to prosecute because they're politically known characters. So maybe that will get them some purchase. But the bottom line is they'll make that motion. It won't be successful. They'll make other pretrial motions in terms of probably motions to suppress evidence, whether it be testimony or, whether it be statements given. The bottom line is they don't even know yet because they don't have discovery. They can't really form their defense strategy from the indictment alone. Even though the indictment has a lot of detail, they need to get discovery. Only after they get discovery, and it will be terabytes of discovery, thousands, maybe millions of pages of documents that their eyes have to pass over. Only then really can they formulate their defense, and that'll include their motion practice.
We are going to hear from the former president in just a few hours when he arrives at his Bedminster home in New Jersey here. He is obviously going to be talking about what happened today. Is it possible that when he speaks on the campaign trail, when he speaks at events at his residences, that those words could be used in a court of law against him?
Yes, just like all the other words that have come out of his mouth that are now haunting him. There is an immutable rule since time immemorial, and it is this. Defense attorneys will tell their clients and the public at large, do not speak if you have any criminal exposure. And since time immemorial, people have heard that advice, ignored it, and gone on to speak, and then they see those words introduced as evidence against them later on at trial. It's the way of the world. I'm not entirely sure why humanity doesn't want to listen to that advice, but in a sense, it's part of what keeps us employed, us criminal defense attorneys.
Our legal analyst, Danny Savalos. Danny, thank you for being there for us to help us understand this throughout the day. And I know you'll be here throughout the evening. Thank you. We're going to have much more ahead live from Miami right here on NBC News Now this hour. We've seen supporters of Donald Trump at the courthouse today, but we are also watching what's happening online, how the discussion, how the words around the former president's arraignment is playing out in social media and more. Next. We've been talking about law enforcement on high alert here in Miami. Again, the issue really relating to the arraignment that we saw from former President Donald Trump related to that 37-count indictment against him, including a count for his alleged co-conspirator, Walt Nauta, his personal aide, somebody who we saw with him even after this arraignment happened at Cafe Versailles. Nauta not arraigned just yet. That is set to happen later this month. Obviously, there is also an element to this that is playing out, not just in person here in downtown Miami, but online as well. And for that, I want to bring in NBC's Brandy Zadrozny, who is joining us now live. Brandy, you have been monitoring some of this, right? We've seen today go fairly smoothly, other than obviously that one incident we talked about from Sam Brock. Anything on the horizon? Let's look forward here, Brandy. What are you seeing?
Yeah, what we saw online today actually mirrored a lot of what I saw on the live streams from Miami, which is, you know, this cast of characters. You had QAnoners, you had some Proud Boys, you had people in costumes, you had, you know, retirees seemingly with nothing to do for the day. It was just sort of this circus of people, and that was what we saw online, right? We saw Trump's biggest supporters supporting him. You saw a lot of silly memes, you saw just a lot of craziness, and you also saw some posts that were violent in nature, some posts about getting your guns, preparing for the next civil war, seeking some sort of retribution for this crime against Trump, they think. So some of that we did see, but it was fairly quiet in terms of online rhetoric about Trump. It seems like people are a little fatigued, maybe. The most popular post on some of the pro-Trump forums today was not about the indictment at all. It was about Starbucks and pride. So people have lost a little bit of the energy, I think, for this.
Yeah. Brandy Zadrozny, thank you so much for that reporting as you are keeping an eye, we know, on all things online rhetoric, et cetera. Brandy, thank you very much. Still ahead this hour live from Miami, much more to get to, including a look at how we got to this point in the first place. You may be asking yourself that, or your friends that. We are answering that question, the many twists and turns as this particular special counsel case has led to this moment here in Miami. That's coming up step by step after the break. We'll also take you live to Bedminster, where Donald Trump is set to land not too long from now and then speak. You see the chairs set up. Our team is there on the ground. We'll bring it to you live in just a minute. We are back live from in front of that federal courthouse in Miami, where we saw that arraignment of former President Trump just in the last couple of hours. And that moment now begins a new chapter in an already 18-month saga that started pretty much the moment those moving trucks lined up on Pennsylvania Avenue after Inauguration Day. So just how did we get here? Watch. It starts just after the former president moved out of the White House in 2021 with boxes of classified documents stacked on a stage at Mar-a-Lago, according to the indictment. Some then moved to a bathroom. Around this time, the National Archives demands some of the classified documents from the Trump presidency they're supposed to have, but don't. Then a key moment that summer. The indictment says Mr. Trump allegedly showed a writer a document laying out a plan of attack, citing a recording. And Mr. Trump says, as president, I could have declassified it. Now I can't, you know, but this is still a secret. Fast forward about 6 months later, Mr. Trump's personal valet and alleged co-conspirator, Walt Nauta, returns 15 boxes of classified documents to the archives, according to the indictment. But that didn't stop the FBI from opening a criminal investigation. A month later, a D.C. grand jury came together. In June, a couple FBI agents and a DOJ attorney went down to South Florida and got a signed letter from Mr. Trump's attorneys saying, essentially, they'd turned over everything they had. That turned out not to be true, because in August, the FBI carried out a search warrant at Mar-a-Lago and releasing this picture of documents laid out on the floor, something Mr. Trump didn't like seeing.
The shameful raid and break-in of my home, Mar-a-Lago, was a travesty of justice
Attorney General Merrick Garland named a special counsel to lead the investigation in November.
I signed an order appointing Jack Smith to serve as special counsel.
Now there's Jack Smith, tasked with looking at the January 6th attack and the classified documents case. Mr. Trump now officially running to win back the White House, furious.
I took the documents. I'm allowed to. I have the absolute right to do whatever I want with them.
Over the course of the next 6 months or so, the special counsel issuing subpoenas and hearing from a lot of people in Mr. Trump's orbit, all leading up to last week when the Department of Justice unsealed the indictment, revealing those 37 felony counts against the former president.
We have one set of laws in this country, and they apply to everyone.
All of that, of course, leading to today, that first ever federal arraignment of a former president. He is saying plenty about it, Mr. Trump, speaking not just at a cafe here in Miami, a kind of campaign stop, if you will, but also set to speak later on tonight at Bedminster. We'll get there in a second. But you know who's not saying much at all about this? Anyone from the White House. Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre today giving a kind of no comment on the questions related to this Donald Trump arraignment. But she did respond to accusations from many in the Republican Party that the Biden administration is working to help weaponize the Department of Justice. Listen.
The president has been very, very clear. The Department of Justice is independent. He wants to restore the independence of the Department of Justice, and that's what you've seen. That is why we have been very, very consistent. When it comes to criminal cases, we just do not comment.
While President Biden has largely stayed away from responding to the details of the indictment itself, First Lady Jill Biden has not overnight. At a fundraiser, according to the Associated Press, she says it's a little shocking that so many Republicans have responded the way that they have to this indictment, still thinking of voting for him, even with the allegations laid out by the DOJ. It is not something we hear often from her. I want to bring in Kayla Tausche now, who is live for us back home in Washington. Kayla, in many ways, the White House has zero interest. Let me rephrase that. In every way, the White House has zero interest in publicly saying much or anything about the arraignment today of Donald Trump. It feels like part of the strategy, insofar as it exists, is to show the president being presidential and let that speak for itself.
And that strategy, Hallie, could not be any clearer. Officials making a point to say that the First Lady's comments were unscripted and they were off the cuff. And speaking of off the cuff, just a few moments ago, President Biden himself making a joke at an event for the chiefs of mission around the world at the State Department and saying that when he met with President Xi, they had independent interpreters. He turned his notes in and he laughed and said, that's not a reference to the former president. But apart from some of those asides and a very emphatic President Biden last week to Peter Alexander saying that he never in any instance would direct the Department of Justice to bring or refrain from bringing any charges, the White House has repeatedly declined to say anything on this situation, and they want to keep it that way.
There's also a policy nexus, Kayla, as it relates to what we're seeing, right? Because you have, and what's been interesting to watch as this arraignment was unfolding today, you had not just obviously business as usual at the White House, but down Pennsylvania Avenue back home in D.C., over on the Senate side, you had Senator Mitch McConnell declining to answer any questions about this, sidestepping questions from reporters. There's very little love lost between those two, right? Mitch McConnell and Donald Trump. But the senator said something along the lines of, well, there's lots of candidates in the race. I'm not going to be commenting on all of them. It is also true that Donald Trump is the only candidate in the race who is facing a federal arraignment and these federal charges. But you're seeing Senator J.D. Vance, too, for example, Republican senator, saying today he's going to hold up DOJ nominees until this investigation ends. He can't throw a wrench in the whole thing, right? But he can certainly slow things down, Senator Vance. This goes beyond, right? When you talk about the domino effect of this, there's like a ripple effect.
Right, and he can slow things down, Hallie, on that point. And he can do that until he decides to either drop his opposition or Senator Chuck Schumer, the top Senate Democrat, decides that maybe he can get 60 votes to override that opposition. from 2/3 of the chamber. That's unlikely, but I think it's also worth noting that, Hallie, there aren't that many people within the Department of Justice that this would actually impact, because the White House has nominated and confirmed 90 out of 118 appointments at the Department of Justice, according to the Partnership for Public Service. There are two high-profile nominations, a commissioner at the U.S. Parole Commission and another official that deals with violence against women that have been nominated that are currently sitting at the Senate. But apart from that, the DOJ is pretty fully staffed. And so this might be nothing more than political theatrics. And as far as Senator McConnell and others like Senator Thune, who also have been fairly quiet on this front, I think they're just hoping that this news cycle passes and they can move on to other talking points.
Kayla Tausche live for us in Washington. Kayla, great to see you as always. Former President Trump, as we speak, is on his way. He's in the air heading back to New Jersey to his Bedminster home. He's set to arrive sometime the next couple of hours ahead of that first speech after his arraignment here in Miami this afternoon. Again, Mr. Trump's first message to Americans who will be judging him from the ballot box this primary season, Republican voters at least. He is already trying to win so many of them over. Take a look at this moment as he was on his way out of Miami not too long ago. Watch.
Are you ready? Food for everyone. Food for
NBC's Vaughn Hilliard is joining us now. So, Vaughn, you are there at Bedminster. Set the scene for us. What can we expect tonight?
He is on his way. He will be landing into Newark International Airport, Hallie, before his motorcade will make its way here to his Bedminster private club, where there's a couple hundred who will be here in attendance. We are expecting primetime remarks from the former president. It's a little deja vu. It kind of feels like 2.5 months ago when I was at Mar-a-Lago when he returned from Manhattan and went on a half-hour speech in which he derided that investigation and that indictment as a witch hunt. And we should expect similar measures here today. I asked an aide close to the former president what we should expect, and he said you should expect, quote, a defiant President Trump. As much as it is a legal defense, it's also a political one. And when you look at some of the names of the folks who will be here in attendance tonight, you see some close political allies, but also some potential U.S. Senate candidates who see Donald Trump's political force within the Republican Party and among the electorate. We should note 2 months ago when Donald Trump was arrested. Since then, first arrested since then, his lead over Ron DeSantis has now doubled, Hallie. So tonight and the opportunity to address millions of Americans is an important opportunity.
You also have to look ahead to not just the primary season, Vaughn, but to the general election season beyond it. I think it's important to remind people that there is already a snapshot of where voters stand in the sort of days since this indictment first dropped. We know that about half of Republicans haven't had their minds changed about this. But when you pull out and look more broadly at a population beyond simply the Republican base, about 80% of people polled believe that these national security allegations, these document allegations laid out in this indictment are concerning, are highly concerning. When you look at Republicans, just 38% of Republicans feel that way, Vaughn. This is the dynamic, the push-pull that is going to be trailing the former president for the rest of this primary season, because you know him, I know him. I think there's very little chance he's not going to talk about it, and he's not going to use it to rally people around him.
And he can't run from him. I mean, if there are trials, potentially multiple, happening at the same time and running in parallel to a general election, it will be front and center to the American electorate. And so for Donald Trump, it is grabbing his own narrative. And even if it runs counter to what the Department of Justice lays out in an indictment, he is portraying this as political persecution. And right now, his favorability among Republican voters, Hallie, is unchanged since October of 2020, a month before his last presidential election here. And he understands, and even his Republican rivals understand, that he still holds a clout among the Republican electorate. And I've talked to a great many voters over the last weeks about the investigation and the indictments, and they say, well, they may be looking toward another candidate in this GOP field. It is not because of these investigations or the indictments. Hallie?
What is it because of, Vaughn? Are they just sick of the drama?
It's the drama. It's the drama, and they see another Republican candidate, Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley, as a potential alternative, somebody who still wants to carry out that MAGA conservative platform, but without everything that comes with Donald Trump.
Vaughn Hilliard, we'll be talking to you again, I know, later on tonight as you are live from Bedminster. Vaughn, thank you very much. We've said this word a lot over the course of the last 56 minutes, right? That this is an unprecedented moment in American history. I've said it so many times, I can't even get it out of my mouth. But how does it fit in the scope of where we're at? We're going to get into that with historian Michael Beschloss right after the break. A lot of questions tonight about what a president, what a former president can and cannot do. Questions about whether a candidate for president can still run for office if you're facing federal charges like Donald Trump is. The answer to that is yes. He could certainly continue to run. He has insisted he will continue to run. And if he retakes the White House after 2024, it will be yet another historic moment in a presidency, an administration, and a candidacy that has been full of them. Not always, perhaps, for the reasons that Donald Trump would have wanted. I want to bring in NBC News historian Michael Beschloss, who is joining us now. Mr. Beschloss, it is good to see you, as always. Donald Trump is somebody who I think cares deeply about his legacy and who sees himself as part of a broader sweep of history. I know it's tough to do kind of like the instant historical analysis, but I'd love to hear your shot.
This is a guy who wants more presidential power than probably anyone who has ever served. You know, that's what we saw during that presidency. And the other thing is that it's brought us to this day. Could I be blunt? What this day means in history is we have never, ever seen in American history a president with this much chance of winding up his life in a federal prison.
What should people, how will the next generation see this moment, Mr. Beschloss, if you had to guess? I know that's a tough one, but I wonder what the history books are going to write 2 decades from now.
They're either going to say that this was a president who did some bad things and was brought to justice by a fair system, or that this was a president who was unfairly treated by a political process. Same thing today. The only difference is that 20 years from now, historians will have a much firmer view based on hindsight.
Michael Beschloss, it's great to see you. Thank you, as always, for being part of our coverage on a day that is, again, making history. We've got more coverage coming up right now. I'm Hallie Jackson, live here in Miami, and we are coming on the air on a day that, as we said, has made history. Donald Trump pleading not guilty to more than 36 federal charges in the building behind me here, the federal courthouse in Miami. This is the first time ever that a former president has faced federal charges, has pleaded not guilty to federal charges. We have seen in the last hour his plane leaving Miami International Airport. This is some video from not too long ago. He is in the air now in that plane, heading back to Bedminster, New Jersey. That's where he plans to speak at his golf club. You see, I think we have a live shot of Bedminster. There it is. It may look familiar to you. This is a location where Donald Trump auditioned potential cabinet members back during his transition and in the early days of his presidency. Now it is the site of a de facto rally, if you will, post-arraignment. The second such time we've seen something like this. The first, of course, after his indictment on the state level in New York. Now a different ballgame as the special counsel has brought those 37 counts against him. You're going to watch those remarks from Bedminster live right here on NBC News Now later on. I want to show you what it's been like here in Miami, and it has been remarkable. We have seen lots of things we've never seen before, like this moment, right? Donald Trump heading to Cafe Versailles, waving to a crowd of, frankly, adoring supporters on that front. A kind of campaign stop here for the current Republican frontrunner for the 2024 nomination. You can see him at the crowd. They sang him happy birthday at one point. The former president turns 77 tomorrow. Listen.
What a great group of people.
Here's what he said right after that.
I think it's a rigged deal here. We have a rigged country. We have a country that's corrupt. We have a country that's got no borders. We have a country that's got nothing but problems. We're a nation in decline, and then they do this stuff.
So let me show you some of the sketches here. We can't put cameras inside a federal court. No news organization can. No stills, no videos. So these pieces of artwork are what we have. That's Donald Trump, obviously, in the red tie. He was there with his attorneys, Chris Kise, Todd Blanche. Walt Nada, the longtime personal aide, was at the table as well, along with his attorney. Nada, of course, the alleged co-conspirator in this federal indictment. Our team inside the courtroom says that the former president was pretty stone-faced, had his hands clasped on the table, arms crossed at certain points, looking at other points, visibly irritated with the proceedings. As he left this, you see that? That's right, somebody getting in front of the motorcade, Secret Service or somebody appearing to tackle him, and then people running alongside the cars, Secret Service agents running as well, a scene that we just don't see all that often. We are just now hearing in the last hour or so from the Secret Service saying that this person was removed swiftly. Their actions had no impact on security. Miami police say that this person is still in their custody. That was just one of a number of fascinating and memorable moments on this extremely hot and humid day here in June in Miami. Look, there's a little bit of a confrontation here. It's kind of mini brawl, that might be overstating it, in front of the courthouse here. Hundreds of people gathered, but we should be clear, largely peaceful today for the most part. Some little flare-ups here and there, but overall this day went about as expected, at least from that front. Here's what we're learning from the people who watched that 47-minute hearing, our team in the room. The former president's attorney actually said the words "not guilty" on his behalf. Prosecutors are going to have to provide a witness list. The former president is not going to be able to talk to anybody who is on that list about the case. Same goes for Nada. No travel restrictions. He can go out and rally. He can keep his passport. And as for Nada, that alleged co-conspirator, he'll be arraigned later in the month, June 27th. Remember why the former president is here. 37 federal charges laid out in this indictment related to some of the country's most sensitive national security secrets. Think of him, 3 buckets. Like this, right? Mr. Trump's accused of keeping classified documents he knew he shouldn't have had. He's accused of showing those documents to people who shouldn't have seen them. And he's accused of refusing to give those documents back when he was asked to do so. That is the crux of where a lot of this is coming from. We're going to get to the legal, the political, the security. We're going to get to the political analysis from our team on the ground. But I want to start here in Miami with our indefatigable legal analyst and correspondent Laura Jarrett and Ken Delaney, our national security correspondent. Ken, I'll start with you because you were in the room, right? I mean, and just to set the scene for people, if you're wondering about the backstory of this, there were, hundreds of journalists who wanted to get in there today. The courtroom only takes so many, right? There was some workings, whatever. They sort of at random, I think, drew who was going to end up in court.
Might have been random.
Who knows? Whatever. Figured out who was going to end up in court in the actual room itself. That matters not just because we want to be able to say, Ken, you were there, but because there are things that happen in the room, things you can pick up on, things you can see that the camera going to the overflow room couldn't see, right?
Well, to be clear, I was in the overflow room. And there was, look.
Which is also great and important for other reasons as well.
There was a lot that was perfunctory and pro forma about this proceeding today, but what was not perfunctory is to hear the magistrate judge announce the case, the United States of America versus Donald J. Trump. That was just a remarkable moment. Mr. Trump, as you said, was pretty stone-faced, pretty stoic, wore a blue suit and a red tie, as you see in the sketch, sitting with his lawyers. On the other side of the table, David Harbach, the lead counsel for the special counsel, along with Jay Bratt, who is the chief of the counter-espionage section of the Justice Department, who's been working this case. He was one of the people that went down in June and served that grand jury subpoena, demanding the documents back, and the lack of response to that was part of what got us here. Jack Smith, the special counsel, was sitting in the gallery. It was interesting to watch him actually laugh and joke a little bit with the people around him. And then I saw a report, I was gone by then, that he was staring pretty hard at Mr. Trump as the hearing was ending. The only news, sort of interesting thing that happened in this hearing was that this judicial order that Mr. Trump not discuss the case with the other witnesses, including Walt Nauta. This is going to be a pretty interesting thing. They work together. They're together every day.
He was with him at Cafe Versailles, where the former president stopped right after the arraignment. So to be clear, Laura, they can still talk, just not about anything having to do with the case.
Right. And it's pretty standard to see that in a case like this, where you've got people who are alleged to have participated in a conspiracy, right? That's the crux of what this is in terms of the actual charges between the two of them. And so the idea is there that the prosecutors don't want them trying to get their story straight, trying to collude on their testimony. Interesting, though, that the judge is the one that actually imposed this. It doesn't sound like prosecutors were the one, at least according to the reporting I saw. They weren't the ones pushing for this. In fact, they now have to turn over a witness list, which I bet they don't want to turn over because there's some people on that list Trump doesn't know that they talked to. And now he's going to have to face a situation in which he can't talk to them about the case either.
What do you think is missing in the discussion around what has gone on today, Laura? In other words, pull back. Big picture, right? these are early days for this legal process for Donald Trump, and there are still other legal liabilities that he could face in Fulton County, Georgia, where a potential indictment could come in August. And with Jack Smith, the special counsel, who is also looking into the former president's actions related to the attack on the Capitol.
Big picture, this is a stress test for the U.S. justice system. This is a Department of Justice that has been under the attack of the former president of the United States for the better part of 7 years. For the better part of 7 years, there's been a steady drumbeat that the department is politicized, and yet the department went forward with this prosecution, knowing how difficult it would be, not only for the attorney general, but the current president of the United States to be able to deal with this situation. But the Justice Department and the prosecutors, the career prosecutors in that department, decided to move forward with it anyway.
Laura Jarrett, it's been great to have you. Thank you so much. Ken, stand by for a second. Our legal analyst, Danny Savalos, is with us as well. And Danny, to the point that Ken was making, Jack Smith in the courtroom here, notable to me because Donald Trump has been going after Jack Smith in an extremely personal way, calling him, among other things, a deranged psycho, going after him even in just the last couple of days here. And yet Jack Smith showed up in that courtroom in what was perhaps symbolically a way of saying, these are my guys, meaning the prosecutors, and I have their back, like kind of a you can't intimidate us moment. Am I overreading that, or is that how you see it too?
No, I don't think anyone expected Jack Smith to actually handle the arraignment itself, but to be physically present isn't unusual. Here's the thing, and this is especially so when it comes to U.S. attorneys and the government. They are big fans of what I call the show of force. When it comes to a sentencing or closing arguments, everyone from the team comes into the court, the FBI agents, even other AUSAs who aren't even involved in the case. They're big on group support. They're big on the team mentality. It's no surprise that Jack Smith would have shown up in court in the audience because he's there to support the fine men and women on his team. That's DOJ 101. Yeah. They're big on supporting each other. They're part of a team. It's always a team effort. That's why when they go to the podium after an arrest is made, they spend half the time thanking the fine men and women of the Postal Service, the FBI, local police, everyone else who assisted. That's the culture in DOJ. So no surprise that Jack Smith is there. He's showing Trump that the team is on the job.
As we are taking a look now at some of the other video that we've seen of the former president today, Ken, talk about what's next, because Chuck Rosenberg put it in, I think, one of our legal analysts, and Danny, too, in a very memorable way. This isn't the top of the first inning. This is the first pitch in the first inning.
Look, in theory, the Justice Department should be ready to go to trial in 70 days, but that's not how this works. What we're going to be looking for now is to what extent do Donald Trump and his lawyers try to delay this thing, try to bury the Justice Department in motions? Is that going to be their strategy? Because, you know, it should take about a year for this case to go to trial, but it could take 2 years. We could be sitting there November 2024, and this case is still pending. And guess what? If Donald Trump's elected president and this case is still pending, it's suspended. The current sitting president can't be tried and prosecuted by the Justice Department under current Justice Department doctrine. He also can't pardon himself according to Justice Department doctrine, but that's never been litigated.
Is that true? I mean, the experts, well, that's exactly, well, that's true. That 1974 DOJ memo, he could try, but it will probably go to the Supreme Court. Yeah. Ken Delaney, and a long day for you. Thank you for being with us. I want to bring in my colleague, Gabe Gutierrez, who is also in that courtroom. He's with me here in Miami. Dasha Burns is also in South Florida, over in Doral, where the former president started his day. Gabe, I'll go to you because you have the benefit of not just covering the former president, covering other candidates in this race and in previous races. You know this region, Gabe. You know South Florida, right? The politics of this moment, even just beyond Miami,
of course,
are extremely, I don't know, pick your adjective, fascinating, complex.
And look, it feels different here than it did several months ago when we were in Lower Manhattan because of the politics of South Florida. Just after the former president left this building, he went not far from here to Cafe Versailles, Cuban-American community, many of his supporters, and they sung happy birthday to him. He clearly taking what would otherwise be known as a sort of victory lap, even though he just faced federal indictment. But yes, the politics of this moment, quite complicated, Hallie. We've been speaking with voters in Iowa and New Hampshire over the last several weeks, obviously not since this indictment came down, but many of these GOP primary voters, and By the way, there were a few Trump supporters who actually went into the courtroom, by the way. We spoke.
How'd that happen?
Because some members of the public were allowed in along with the media.
Wow.
And there was a few of them that saw what was happening and they wanted to see it firsthand. And I spoke with one of them who told me, and I spoke with Trump supporters yesterday in Doral as well, they just don't buy this. And when you press them on specifics of the indictment, you ask them about should the former president have had these classified documents in his bathroom at his estate? They just don't want to hear about it. They point to, why wasn't Hillary Clinton prosecuted? Why wasn't President Joe Biden prosecuted? They just don't want to hear about specifics. They see this as a weaponization of the Justice Department. And we're hearing that from more and more of these Republican candidates. Governor DeSantis, even today, again, talking about the weaponization of the Department of Justice.
You know why many of these candidates and campaigns are talking about this, Gabe. It's because the numbers show that's where the party is. You look at polling, for example, even from just in March, about Republicans who believe or who view favorably the Department of Justice and the FBI. Right. It is hovering around 50%, right? It is a different number for Democrats.
And there is, something that I found extremely interesting today, Hallie, is the complicated position that Nikki Haley is taking on this. Our colleague Ali Vitale put in this reporting as well. She is now with a new statement today saying that she is inclined to pardon former President Trump. This after saying just the day before, I believe, or just 2 days ago, that his conduct was reckless. And she seemed to make the distinction, well, whether or not how I feel about the conduct, pardoning him might be better for the country. But she is trying to walk a really fine line, trying to figure out where to come down on this. And this all comes as, of course, Governor Chris Christie coming out strongly in that town hall, saying, that, what was it, the vanity, that it was...
political games.
Yes,
playing political
exactly.
games, these rivals.
Paraphrasing here, but coming out strongly with a harsh tone against former President Trump. But the Governor DeSantis sticking by that rhetoric of weaponizing the Justice Department. He hasn't come out and said whether he would pardon former President Trump, but he is clearly trying to appeal to those more conservative voters, many of them who were out here today, who were out in Doral yesterday. When I spoke with them, they just don't buy the indictment in general. They don't want to talk about specifics of it. They just see it as the DOJ coming after Donald Trump.
Well, let me tell you, as it relates to that Nikki Haley comment, there are some rival campaigns who are privately already looking at that and pointing to it as to raising some questions on it. Gabe, stand by for a sec. Let me bring in Dasha Burns, because Dasha, one of the things that Gabe brought up here was the idea that and I've heard it from Republicans, I'm sure you have too. President Biden did it. Hillary Clinton did it. There are key, Mike Pence, nobody said that, but that's still something that could be considered in that umbrella. The key difference in all of those cases has been cooperation with the Department of Justice versus what Donald Trump did, as this indictment lays out, which is seek to obstruct the Department of Justice. How do we know this? Look at the indictment itself. Every document that Donald Trump is charged on comes after his aide first handed in 15 boxes of classified materials. Multiple legal experts have told our team that if Donald Trump had just handed everything in then, we wouldn't be here, Dasha. We wouldn't be showing the live pictures and the Bedminster rally and everything else. I mean, this is part of why some Republicans consider this to be self-inflicted for the former president.
Yeah, and that was Christie's line, right? He is blaming everybody else, but why does the buck not ultimately stop with Trump when he had several moments in this process where he could have really avoided all of this? But Hallie, I will tell you, for voters, for so many Republican primary voters in particular, it simply does not matter. Look, you talk to any legal expert. I know you've talked to just about every legal expert in your Rolodex today. They will tell you that this is grave, that this is much more serious and significant than any other legal problem that the former president has faced. And yet, the former president is not distinguishing this. He is playing this in the same way that he has played the litany of other problems that he has faced. And neither are his voters, by the way. His voters are also not separating this from anything else that they have seen as attacks, as targets on a former president that the system, whatever system you want to talk about, whether it's the media or the Justice Department or the government or the Democrats, they want to take this guy down, and this is just another way to do it. They are not looking necessarily at the specifics of this case. They are simply adding it to that long list of grievances that the former president has. And he is so good, and you know this, Hallie, from following him for so long. He is so good at delivering this message that this isn't just about me. This is about you. I am standing in the way of a system that is coming for all of you, for this America First movement. And that is what puts candidates like Governor Ron DeSantis, like Nikki Haley, like Mike Pence in this really tough position, because the former president has created this narrative where it is really difficult to separate him and America First and so much of what the Republican Party stands for. When you talk to some other folks outside of the MAGA movement, it's different. But we are talking about the GOP primary voters. Again, very different from when this comes to the general election. But for the primary, this is very likely to give him a boost in the next few weeks, the same way that we saw with that first indictment in New York. He got a boost in fundraising, a boost in polls. And that's what so many of these campaigns, his rival campaigns, are bracing for, because we have seen this pattern before. Again, the legal element of this drastically different than the political element of this. And I think the best representation of that is actually the events of today, where you had this somber moment in a courtroom, and then you're going to have this fundraiser in Bedminster. Those two things are happening on the very same day, and they are different, but they are certainly intertwined, Hallie.
Already in the air, the former president's campaign sending out emails about this. Dasha Burns live for us at Doral. Our thanks to Gabe Gutierrez, who was with us in Miami. He had to run to go do some more reporting. We're going to take you live to Bedminster, as Dasha mentioned, in just a couple of minutes. We're going to tell you the notable people who have been spotted or whose name tags have been spotted coming up in just a bit. But right now I want to show you, as you see Bedminster there, what it looks like now. Let me tell you about it here outside the courthouse. Very different scene. The sort of crowd of supporters for the former president, more in Bedminster than here in Miami. We have seen a lot of it here. I want to bring in Sam Brock, who's been standing outside covering this and this perspective of it. There is going to be, I think, some untangling of the security footprint story in the days to come here. I want to not lose the headline, which is largely peaceful, right? However, we did see that one incident. I want to show people here on camera on what the scene looked like. Somebody rushing in front of the motorcade as the former president was leaving court. It was a remarkable scene. Look at that. Essentially tackled, tossed away. The car kind of has to get out of its lane. People then start running alongside. You see Secret Service agents running alongside. Well, Sam, I mean, this is not normal. Like, we can just say that in very plain English. That is not how it's supposed to go. An incredible moment, extraordinary, I'm sure stressful for the agents who are tasked with guarding the former president. He, it sounds like, based on your reporting, was not at any ever risk. That was less the concern. The concern was more the crowd around it. Tell me what you're hearing.
That's the irony of all this, is that when you look at the U.S. Secret Service and some of the remarks that they've made specifically about what the dynamic and blueprint was like from a security standpoint here, they said, we're okay, the former president's going to be fine. We're worried about the people that are standing out in the plaza that are interspersed, as we both mentioned earlier today, with all sorts of demonstrators, reporters, the neighbors next door. We're all standing in the same space, and it's not like there's
like totally fine. Detector. It's not like whatever we can all, but that's not normally how it works. This intermingling. There's like, I think, a college or a school down the street. Everybody's out, right? Everybody's in the same space.
I was amazed to see. I was literally having conversations with people that had their dogs out that were like just walking down the street. Do I go to the park today, or do I go take in a federal arraignment? Let me figure out which one it's going to be.
I don't
They're all
them.
standing in the same place, of course, because it's fascinating to see firsthand. But also, you don't want cars that are that close to a federal courthouse where there's all these people standing around it. What about us in terms of our livelihoods as journalists standing here? And it didn't really occur to me until we had this conversation, or you even mentioned it on our special report today, how strange this is. I haven't covered dozens upon dozens of Trump rallies before. I've been to a couple, but to have that level of proximity was kind of scary. And also, this is Florida. Gun laws are lax here. And specifically, Governor DeSantis just rolled back what you need to even conceal carry in Florida, to the point where you don't even need lessons or a permit now. You can just basically do it. And so there's very few barriers to being able to obtain weapons here. And thankfully, I didn't see any. I've certainly been to protests before where there have been people that have been armed and displaying that intentionally to try to create a certain sense of fear. That was not the case today. At no point did I feel scared. But the reality of the situation is they may have to do some reassessments. You had a really interesting conversation I could hear. The former Miami police chief, right? What did he say to you that stuck out?
I asked him if he would do anything differently if the trial was held here in Miami. And he said something interesting, which was that they feel like in this community, if they were to put, let's say, a line of officers out, it would actually potentially stoke more anxiety or confrontation. Maybe? Yeah, exactly. And I thought, well, you know, that's, again, I'm not a police. I'm not a member of law enforcement. I am somebody who has been to a lot of Donald Trump rallies, and I'm always behind a bike rack. I'm just not saying for me, the media. I'm saying they typically have a little bit more what they call hardened barricade, bike rack or whatever, separating different sections of a rally or the former president from the people around him or whatever the case may be.
As it was explained to me, this is, quote, the Miami way, right? And like, it's kind of how the culture functions here. People are going to be fine. Just let them sort of be as they're going to be. Don't put too many restrictions on there. And I will say, when the event was over and the former president was gone, you saw like 50 people with riot gear, Miami police officers walking through this plaza. So they were clearly nearby, waiting if needed. But the reality is there wasn't the deterrence on the ground. And maybe that helped create a calmer environment. Or
maybe we just didn't see it.
We didn't see it. Or maybe it scared some people because there would just seem like there was just not much structure going on. But again, it was all peaceful here where we were today.
Sam Brock, thank you so much for being out there for us today.
Thanks, Al.
I know you are used to this Miami heat, my friend.
I'm still not used to it. It's been 4 years, so I'm glad you have a fan.
Thank you, Sam. Appreciate it. You know who's not? So we talked to Sam about the security piece. We've talked to our legal analysts about the legal piece of this. We've talked about the political bucket, too. Donald Trump is saying plenty about this arraignment. He said a little bit at Cafe Versailles. He's set to say more at Bedminster. We're going to take you there in just a minute. But you know who's not saying too much at all, intentionally? Anybody from the White House. Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre today gave this kind of no comment on questions related to this Donald Trump arraignment. But she did respond to accusations from a lot of people inside the GOP that the Biden department is working to help weaponize the Department of Justice. Listen to what she said.
The president has been very, very clear. The Department of Justice is independent. He wants to restore the independence of the Department of Justice, and that's what you've seen. That is why we have been very, very consistent. When it comes to criminal cases, we just do not comment.
I want to bring in Kayla Tausche, who is live for us back home in Washington, just outside the White House. So, Kayla, that's the line from the White House press secretary. We have not heard from President Biden specifically on this arraignment, on the indictment. We have heard from a Biden, and that's First Lady Jill Biden. Tell us about it.
Well, she was at a fundraiser, Hallie, yesterday in New York, and she made an off-the-cuff comment when she was asked by the Associated Press about a sect of the Republican Party that was still going to be committed to voting for the former president, Donald Trump, even given the indictment, even given the arraignment. And she said, and I am quoting here, she said, "It's a little shocking that so many Republicans are still thinking of voting for him." Now, White House officials were very clear that that was an off-the-cuff and unscripted moment. They were fairly surprised that she even went there and said that, because the official line from 1600 Pennsylvania, Hallie, has been not to comment on anything related to this specific situation. Now, they'll talk about the fact that they're trying to maintain the independence of the Department of Justice, as you heard Karine Jean-Pierre, as you heard President Biden very emphatically last week himself say. But they do not want to talk about this situation. They don't want to talk about the fact that top Republicans are drawing parallels to the investigation that is ongoing into President Biden's handling of classified documents, and some that were found at his office and were stored in his garage. They don't really want to comment yet on any findings about the national security implications on the substance of the documents that were in Donald Trump's possession. Yesterday, John Kirby, who's the NSC spokesman, deferred many of those questions to the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. So there are a lot of very legitimate questions about this situation and about how it's unfolding. And so far, it's been very hard to get much of anything out of the White House, Hallie.
What about down Pennsylvania Avenue on Capitol Hill, Kayla? That's one thing that I've been watching, talking with Republicans as we are hearing / not hearing, for example, from top Senate Republican Mitch McConnell. No love lost between him and Donald Trump, and yet he's sidestepping questions on this arraignment today. You're seeing Senator J.D. Vance, a Republican, suggesting he's going to slow down the nomination process for DOJ DOJ nominees. There is a dynamic here that plays for Donald Trump with his allies. I wouldn't characterize McConnell as that, but with his allies in Congress. On the House side, you had the House Speaker, for example, suggesting that, hey, bathroom doors lock, essentially, seeming to downplay the idea that classified documents were in a bathroom at Mar-a-Lago.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, Hallie, the more mainstream establishment Republicans like Mitch McConnell, like John Thune, like others of their ilk, have not wanted to wade into this debate. They feel that it's a no-win situation for them politically. They believe the news cycle will blow over and that wading into the debate essentially will not help them, will not help the party. Then you have some of the newer, more MAGA-aligned Republicans like Senator Vance, who you mentioned, who has vowed to hold up the Justice Department nominees. There are only two currently sitting at the Senate awaiting confirmation, but he's vowed to hold up that process, which he can do unilaterally by himself. He can't block them, but he can slow it down because he believes that the agency has been politicized. Now, that process won't move forward unless he drops his opposition or unless Senator Chuck Schumer, the top Senate Democrat, believes that he could get 2/3 support of the Senate to move beyond that, to consider some of those nominees. But that's more theatrical because the Justice Department is fairly fully staffed and there aren't that many positions that are actually open. But certainly, you know, Republicans have been having to draw the fault lines around where they stand on this situation. And we've seen some, you know, a pretty wide spectrum of the responses at this point.
Kayla Tausche live for us back home in Washington. Kayla, thank you very much. Appreciate it. I want to show you now a live picture out of Bedminster, New Jersey. Former President Donald Trump is on his way back there as we speak. And that is the scene. That is the stage, the setup, the microphone from where he will speak not too long from now. We will bring that to you when it happens. But after hours of special coverage, there's some other news happening across the country that we got to get to tonight, like some new details about that shooting outside the NBA Finals in Denver. We'll give you the new information we're just learning from officials about whether the shooting was connected to the game. More on that and other big headlines coming up. You are looking at a live shot of Bedminster, New Jersey, where you expect to see former President Donald Trump speak there for the first time since being arraigned on federal charges at the courthouse behind me here in Miami. We'll get to that later on in the show, but we've got some other news to report, too, including that new economic data out today. It shows the inflation rate is cooling off to the lowest it's been in more than 2 years. What does this mean? Potentially good news for your money because what you pay for stuff isn't quite as high as it used to be. Not to get too weedsy about it, but it's the Consumer Price Index. It basically measures how much stuff costs. It went up by 4% in May. So, yes, things are getting more expensive, but it's not getting as expensive as quickly, right? There's been a downward trend in inflation. You see this chart here. What does it mean in real terms? Your eggs are cheaper. Bacon, I think, is a little bit cheaper. Look at those breakfast staples. Not bad news if you like a hearty breakfast. The Fed wanted to see something like this as they're weighing this big decision tomorrow on whether or not to hike rates. I want to bring in now our business and data reporter, Brian Chung. Brian, help us. Like, how am I going to feel this, right? In other words, when I'm doing my monthly grocery budget, what's going to make the difference for me, or my monthly whatever budget? Where are the highlights in this inflation report? Because it is probably more positive than inflation reports were 6 months ago.
Yeah, well, you shouldn't pull back the amount of money that you're budgeting out for food because, again, as you mentioned, prices are going up. They're just going up at a slower pace. So as you mentioned, that 4% figure came in this morning. That's how much more things are expensive in May of 2023 compared to May of last year. And that's a slower pace than the 4.9% that we saw in April, and much lower than, as you also point out, the 9% rate that we had seen last year. So this is all encouraging, but don't put up the mission accomplished banner yet, because where economists say we really want to be is somewhere closer to 2%. And when you unpack exactly the categories where we continue to see price increases, food still going up by 0.2%. These are monthly changes between April and May. And then shelter. This is the biggest expenditure for most American families. Think of mortgages, think of rents, that actually increasing by 0.6%. And I want to point out that energy did indeed help. That's the reason why the headline number came down, because gasoline prices did decline, which helped energy go down by 3.6%. But again, even in the food category, some things did decline. Eggs went down by 13.8% just between April and May. You have to go back to 1951 to see a drop that fall. So again, maybe try to put some more eggs in that protein for the breakfast, perhaps.
Look ahead to tomorrow, right? Because the Fed's going to meet again. What do we anticipate as far as interest rate hikes? And remember, just to make sure that folks know, doesn't mean your mortgage is going to change if you've locked in a mortgage. Could mean that credit card rate changes if it's based on that base rate, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's not vis-a-vis, but broadly speaking, right, the Federal Reserve is expected to hold interest rates steady because they're looking at this number and saying, well, we've been deliberately moving to raise interest rates to slow this economy. And as they sit back and say, OK, let's wait for the lagged impact of those higher interest rates to take inflation down to 2%. Maybe we can just kind of sit where we are right now and not further raise interest rates and just see if this bite can go down to 2%. But to those that are wondering, well, how is that going to impact these high mortgage rates that I'm seeing, these really brutal credit card rates that I'm seeing? Well, they're not going to be cutting interest rates if they don't move tomorrow. What it means is that they're going to hold those interest rates high. So don't expect to see 3% borrowing for a 30-year fix anytime soon. They'll continue to remain elevated, Hallie.
Brian Chung, thank you for breaking down that economic number out today. Appreciate it. Let's take it to Denver now, where several people, we're learning, are recovering in hospitals in that area tonight after being hurt in a shooting right after the Denver Nuggets, the city's basketball team, won the NBA championship. The shooting happened not too long after the game ended in an arena where fans were celebrating. 9 people were hurt. 3 people were critically hurt. The suspected shooter, also hurt, ended up arrested. There's a bunch of bars in the area where Nuggets fans would have been watching the team take the championship. Let me bring in NBC's Steve Patterson, who's covering this for us. Steve, what's the latest?
Yeah, I mean, this is something else entirely than expected. This had nothing to do with the celebrations that night, but it doesn't mean it's just as unbelievable. The entire city, of course, is buzzing. The Nuggets just win the NBA Finals. As you said, people are out all over the streets, thousands of people flooding the streets. After midnight, though, those crowds start thinning out. Doesn't mean the police presence does, though. They are still out in force, including police in riot gear. And police say almost right next to them at about 12:30 in the morning, gunfire erupts. We're talking more than 20 shots fired, according to police. Hallie, police see multiple suspects on scene. They arrest not 1, but 2. That's the update from police, a 22-year-old and a 33-year-old. One of them, as you mentioned, is shot. They recover multiple weapons. They arrest several suspects. They recover, get this, multiple packets of fentanyl at the scene. This is a drug deal that has to happen just a few feet from where the police are stationed. The chief says that they had plenty of patrols out, but they couldn't account for this happening. Here's what he told reporters. Listen to this.
I think that our planning was appropriate. What we couldn't have planned for is a drug deal right in the middle of a celebration for an NBA championship.
And again, I want to reiterate the chief saying this had nothing to do with the crowds that were just celebrating the win, but he will step up the police presence for the parade, which is in just a few days. Hallie?
Do we know anything more, Steve, about the victims of the shooting here?
Yeah, so 10 shot, including, as you mentioned, at least one of the suspected shooters, 9 men, 1 woman. Some of them are believed to be involved, but police are, of course, investigating that. 5 still in the hospital, 4 had to go emergency surgeries. But the good news here is that no matter who these people are, everyone is expected to fully recover, everybody in fair but stable condition. Hallie?
Steve Patterson live for us on those new developments tonight. Steve, thank you very much. When we come back, what one superstar is saying about serving Bud Light in his bar after all that controversy over the last couple of months. That, plus a live look at Bedminster as former President Trump gets ready to head there, coming up. So country superstar Garth Brooks tonight is responding to some backlash he's getting after saying he will serve every brand of beer, including Bud Light, at his new bar in Nashville. And if you're not sure why that's actually news, it should be on a national broadcast that a bar is going to serve Bud Light. Well, it's because of the controversy, the sort of culture war controversy about it. That's after Bud Light partnered with a trans influencer for a social media ad campaign back in April. Here's what Brooks had to say.
I'm a bar owner now. Are we going to have the most popular beers in the thing? Yes. Here's the deal, man. If you want to come to Friends and Low Places, come in. But come in with love. Come in with tolerance, patience. Come in with an open mind. And it's cool.
Stephen Romo is joining us now. And Stephen, it is notable to hear this from Garth Brooks, who is, of course, known for his country music, right? And when you talk about where some of this backlash against Bud Light has come from, there is a storyline here. Talk us through it.
Yeah, Hallie, the backlash that Garth Brooks is seeing right now has been pretty harsh online. I actually just looked at his social media pages right before you came to me, and the backlash has gotten even more intense. People saying that they're just done with him, people saying that they may even burn the merchandise they do have from him, certainly saying they're not going to buy any more. One person even posting a picture of what appeared to be vomit on Garth Brooks' Facebook page. So some disturbing stuff, but not all that surprising. You mentioned the trans influencer, Dylan Mulvaney, who sort of started this whole Bud Light backlash from Pride, who has faced even more than what Garth Brooks is facing right now from this. We've also seen backlash against Target, even Cracker Barrel now facing backlash online from people who are upset for multiple reasons about the situation for Pride Month, which, by the way, is nothing new, Hallie.
The decision to not boycott Bud Light feels somewhat on brand for Garth Brooks, right?
Yeah, it absolutely is. Some people are surprised by that, but if you've paid any attention to Garth Brooks over the past few decades, this should not be much of a surprise. All the way back in 2000, he was part of a concert called Equality Rocks with George Michael, advocating for LGBTQ plus issues long before many politicians who are now champions for those same issues were a part of any of this. He's also, his late sister Betsy was a member of the LGBTQ plus community. A lot of people pointed to that, maybe opening his eyes to the issues of a community that he himself is not a part of. By the way, something that many families experience once they have someone they actually know within the community.
Stephen Romo, thank you for the latest on all that. Appreciate it. The culture wars in America, if you will. Coming up here on the show, you got crews working to try to rebuild a section of I-95 in Philadelphia. We'll tell you their progress, their timeline, and what's next coming up. The Transportation Secretary in Philadelphia today saying every resource that the federal government has is going to have to be made available to help rebuild I-95, that absolutely crucial artery up and down the East Coast. You know that it collapsed, part of it did, after this fiery truck crash. Listen to what Secretary Pete Buttigieg had to say.
This tragic crash is having an outsized impact on commuters and on goods movement up and down the I-95 corridor. It's a key artery for the movement of people and goods, and that's why it's so important to make sure that it's restored quickly.
Check out what it looked like today on 95. Crews just ripping up the southbound lanes of the highway. You had officials that just decided to tear down that section because of concerns that it maybe wasn't structurally safe because of that eruption. Caught on surveillance footage, by the way. They were concerned that it compromised the integrity of the steel and concrete that makes up the highway there. Look at this shot. I mean, you can see the moment when it happens. That's it. On the top of your screen there, the top half, apparently this truck crashed under the highway, and that's why there's those structural concerns on the southbound part. Northbound part fell in. Emily Aketa has more.
Hey there, Hallie. Well, the rush to rebuild continues as crews are working around the clock on that critical thoroughfare behind me that had been scorched to pieces when a gas tanker crashed and really burst into flames. What you're seeing right now, crews are focusing, zoning in on the southbound lanes, which were also considered unsound, so they are demolishing them before the actual rebuilding process begins. The Transportation Secretary, Pete Buttigieg, on the ground earlier today, surveying the massive undertaking. And I posed the question to him, just what was his level of concern when it comes to the ripple effects, pointing out how economists actually today were warning that we could see an increase in prices because of this road closure. And he acknowledged that. And he acknowledged when routes are disrupted, when trucks are having to spend more time making their deliveries, that can be translated into prices of goods. And he says for that reason, it is of the utmost importance to rebuild this interstate, this critical section of highway, bring it up to speed as quickly, but also as safely as possible. We spoke with a delivery driver who used to traverse this section of I-95 5 to 10 times every day. Listen here.
How does this complicate your job?
In every way, because we depend on roadways to get where we got to go. We're a same-day carrier. We need to get somewhere fast and on time, and if we can't, then we might lose a customer. So could hurt business.
And we're still waiting for more details on the crash investigation, but family members tell us Nathaniel Moody, a beloved father and husband, longtime truck driver, was behind the wheel and tragically died in the accident on Sunday. As for when we could see this section of I-95 rebuilt, well, we are expecting to hear more details on that from officials tomorrow. Hallie?
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks to Emily McKenna for that reporting. We are also learning tonight that all 22 U.S. service members are in stable condition and recovering after they were hurt in what the military is calling a helicopter mishap in Syria. The service members were flying through northeastern Syria when the helicopter apparently ran into trouble, but officials say that was not caused by enemy fire. Here's the latest from a Pentagon spokesperson.
This was an MH-47 Chinook that had a problem with one rotor that caused a hard landing during takeoff. Again, this is under investigation, so we will hopefully learn more soon.
U.S. forces are in the region to fight against ISIS, who have lost a lot of ground in the country since they controlled a lot of sort of bigger regions back in the mid-2010s. In May alone, officials say the military conducted something like 17 operations in Syria, killing 2 ISIS operatives and detaining 20 more. We got a lot more to get to as we're bringing you the show live from Miami tonight here on NBC News Now. I want to show you some live pictures from today's arraignment of former President Trump in this building right behind me here in Miami. An unprecedented moment and a new chapter in an already 18-month-long saga that started almost the moment those moving trucks lined up on Pennsylvania Avenue after President Biden's inauguration. So just how did we get here? Take a look. Starts just after the former president moved out of the White House in 2021 with boxes of classified documents stacked on a stage at Mar-a-Lago, according to the indictment. Some then moved to a bathroom. Around this time, the National Archives demands some of the classified documents from the Trump presidency they're supposed to have but don't. Then a key moment that summer. The indictment says Mr. Trump allegedly showed a writer a document laying out a plan of attack, citing a recording. And Mr. Trump says, as president, I could have declassified it. Now I can't, but this is still a secret. Fast forward about 6 months later, Mr. Trump's personal valet and alleged co-conspirator, Walt Nauta, returns 15 boxes of classified documents to the archives, according to the indictment. But that didn't stop the FBI from opening a criminal investigation. A month later, a D.C. grand jury came together. In June, a couple FBI agents and a DOJ attorney went down to South Florida and got a signed letter from Mr. Trump's attorneys saying, essentially, they'd turned over everything they had. That turned out not to be true because in August, the FBI carried out a search warrant at Mar-a-Lago and releasing this picture of documents laid out on the floor, something Mr. Trump didn't like seeing.
The shameful raid and break-in of my home, Mar-a-Lago, was a travesty of justice.
Attorney General Merrick Garland named a special counsel to lead the investigation in November.
I signed an order appointing Jack Smith to serve as special counsel.
Now there's Jack Smith, tasked with looking at the January 6th attack and the classified documents case. Mr. Trump, now officially running to win back the White House, furious.
I took the documents. I'm allowed to. I have the absolute right to do whatever I want with them.
Over the course of the next 6 months or so, the special counsel issuing subpoenas and hearing from a lot of people in Mr. Trump's orbit, all leading up to last week when the Department of Justice unsealed the indictment, revealing those 37 felony counts against the former president.
We have one set of laws in this country, and they apply to everyone.
All of that, of course, leading to today, the first ever federal arraignment of a former president, and teeing up tonight, which will be the first ever remarks after a federal arraignment of a former president. You have Donald Trump set to arrive back in New Jersey not too long from now. I want to show you that live picture of Newark Airport. That's where his plane will land. He will then head over to where our Vaughn Hilliard is posted up in New Jersey. What's interesting here, Vaughn, I'm going to ask you to set the scene for us in a moment. But first, I want to get to some new reporting about the various legal challenges that Donald Trump faces. Our colleague Blaine Alexander says that essentially Fulton County officials, and remember, that is one of the indictments that the former president could face in Georgia related to his election fraud lies coming up in August, is now looking at what the security preparations were here in Miami and in New York, where Donald Trump has already been indicted. Tell us more about that and what potential tea leaves we may be able to read.
Right. Donald Trump is really facing cross-country legal battles right now. We are here at Bedminster, where he will be arriving shortly. But this new information that Blaine has confirmed out of Fulton County pertains to the sheriff's office, is sending individuals from the office to not only New York, but also to Miami to survey the security measures that were taken around Donald Trump coming in for his arraignment. Now, to note, in the Fulton County investigation, which stems from the allegations of the efforts not only on the part of Donald Trump, but other allies to overturn his loss in the 2020 election in Georgia, he has not been indicted, but we are expecting charges to be announced against potentially Donald Trump and others sometime in the first 3 weeks of August. So we're about 2 months away from them. And that is what notable is that law enforcement in Fulton County is preparing what could be a potentially third indictment for Donald Trump.
Vaughn, you've laid that piece of it out. I see the seats starting to fill behind you. We showed on screen that Donald Trump, his campaign, even as he is in the air, is sending out campaign emails related to today's arraignment. There are some notable names, right, I think, we've either seen or have seen name tags for. I think about Kash Patel, who is somebody who actually testified in the very case that Donald Trump was arraigned on today. It's in front of that D.C. grand jury. I think of somebody who is alleged to have been caught up in that fake elector scheme as well. Tell us more.
Right, Taylor Budowich, who actually just testified in front of the grand jury this week.
Yeah,
he was really kind of a right hand to Donald Trump post-presidency and now heads the super PAC, the Trump-aligned super PAC. He is here in attendance. But also you have the likes of multiple potential Republican Senate candidates in Nevada as well as Ohio that are here in attendance because Donald Trump still holds political clout. You know, this is a Republican Party and a Republican electorate that still has Donald Trump as the faraway front runner. And since his arrest there, in late March in the hush money payment case in Manhattan, he had seen his lead double in an average of polling nationally. And so here tonight, this is going to be a chance for Donald Trump in prime time to address millions of Americans, not only as a legal defense, but also really a political one. We are, to note, Hallie, just 7.5 months away from the Iowa caucus, and this is an opportunity for him to show that not only he, but he also has allies here in attendance with him tonight to back him up on this front.
Vaughn Hilliard, I am sure that we will see and hear more from you later on tonight as we prepare for live coverage of those remarks as news warrants right here on NBC News Now. Thank you so much for joining us here on the road as we have taken the show out to Miami. I'll see you for special coverage tonight with Tom Yamas. Until then, take care.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.